A very good afternoon to each and every one of you. Welcome to this edition of Walking Through History on this cold and chilly Tuesday afternoon. It seems as if the winter weather has finally decided to set in, which maybe if you're like me, Alan, you might have been wondering about that with the nice weather we had last week, some days in the 60s. I definitely can't complain about that too much in December, but we have been brought back down to reality as the temperatures themselves have been brought back down. We're trying to stay warm this week, but we're thankful to be inside in our nice heated houses, being able to study with everyone today. Thank you for being here. Hope that you've enjoyed a good week thus far. Hope you have a Bible, maybe a nice cup of hot chocolate or coffee there with you. And as you study together with us from God's Word, specifically, we are in Joshua chapter 11 today. Joshua chapter 11. Again, hope you have a Bible. Hope you join us here in this text. Talk to Alan just a second ago. Alan, welcome. Hope you're doing well today. I appreciate you taking some time to study with us from Joshua chapter 11.
Yeah, it's good. We've had a good week. We finally got kind of settled in. We're able to get our Christmas tree up after 2 weeks of December here. So we're just cutting it under the wire. But Christmas tree, got some presents under the tree. We're looking good now.
Hey, that's right. My in-laws are visiting with us this week, and my parents will be coming next week. We are in full holiday swing, it seems. Thankful for these joyful times of years, enjoying God's blessings and taking some time to be thankful for what He has given us. Certainly it is the most wonderful time of year, though we know that things are tough right now for a great number of people, given the circumstances we're in regarding COVID-19. Thankfully, it seems the help is hopefully on the way. That'll be here soon enough, and we are constantly mindful and praying for those who are sick or who are concerned for the sick, especially for those who are caring for the sick, our medical professionals in our community, even those among our church family. They are truly heroes, people who are wonderful servants caring for the sick. We're very thankful for them and everything they do, and we just pray that things will continue to progress and get better as time goes on. Maybe this holiday season will simply be good as far as being, let's say, take our minds off of the difficulty of this year and close it out in a good fashion. But we cannot think of very many things we could be doing that would be better than taking time to read God's Word and to consider what is found within it. We have been here in the book of Joshua, which details the conquest of the land of Canaan. We have looked at the conquest of the children of Israel against Joshua, a stumble they had against Ai, but they rebounded well with the Lord's help. They have gone on a strong conquest of the southern regions of the land of Canaan. And now we're shifting our focus to the northern cities that are found within this land, their conquest against them. We're going to read the text together here, Joshua 11, and then make some observations from the text to hopefully deepen our knowledge and understanding of the text, because we do believe that the more we know about God's Word, the greater knowledge we have of it, the greater ability we are able to have stronger faith, and we're able to trust Him all the more. Joshua 11 is where we are. If you don't have the Bible, no worries. You have we should have the text here on the screen. You can follow along with us as we read from the Christian Standard Bible. The text says in Joshua 11 and verse 1, the king Jabin of Hazor heard this news, the news about what they had done to the southern regions, the southern kings and cities. So he sent a message, the text tells us, to King Jobab of Madon, and the kings of Shimron and Akshaph, and the kings of the north in the hill country, the Arabah south of Chinnereth, the Judean foothills, the slopes of Dor to the west, the Canaanites in the east and west, the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, and Jebusites in the hill country, and the Hivites at the foot of Hermon in the land of Mizpah. They went out with their armies, a multitude as numerous as the sand on the seashore, along with a vast number of horses and chariots. All these kings joined forces. They came and camped together at the waters of Merom to attack Israel. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, for at this time tomorrow I will cause all of them to be killed before Israel. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots." So Joshua and all the troops surprised them at the waters of Merom and attacked them. the Lord handed them over to Israel, and they struck them down, pursuing them as far as Greater Sidon and Misrephoth, Maim to the east, and as far as the valley of Mizpah. They struck them down, leaving no survivors. Joshua treated them as the Lord had told him. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots. At that time, Joshua turned back and captured Hazor and struck down its king with the sword, because Hazor had formerly been the leader of all these kingdoms. They struck down everyone in it with the sword, completely destroying them. He left no one alive, and then he burned Hazor. Joshua captured all the kings and their cities and struck them down with the sword. He completely destroyed them, as Moses, Lord's servant, had commanded. However, Israel did not burn any of the cities that stood on their mounds except Hazor, which Joshua burned. The Israelites plundered all the spoils and cattle of the cities for themselves. They struck down every person with the sword until they had annihilated them, leaving no one alive. Just as the Lord had commanded his servant Moses, Moses commanded Joshua. This is what Joshua did, leaving nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. So Joshua took all this land, the hill country, all the Negev, all the land of Goshen, the foothills, the Arabah, and the hill country of Israel with its foothills, from Mount Halak, which ascends to Seir, as far as Baal Gad, in the valley of Lebanon, at the foot of Mount Hermon. And he captured all the kings and struck them down, putting them to death. Joshua waged war with all these kings for a long time. No city made peace with the Israelites except the Hivites who inhabited Gibeon. All of them were taken in battle, for it was the Lord's intention to harden their hearts, so they would engage Israel in battle, be completely destroyed without mercy, and be annihilated just as the Lord had commanded Moses. At that time, Joshua proceeded to exterminate the Anakim from the hill country, Hebron, Debir, and Anab, all the hill country of Judah and of Israel. Joshua completely destroyed them with their cities. No Anakim were left in the land of Israel except for some remaining in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. As Joshua took the entire land, in keeping with all the Lord had told Moses, Joshua then gave it as an inheritance to Israel, according to their tribal allotments. And after all this, after everything we've seen from chapter 1 through chapter 11 here, after this, the land had rest from war. This is a great finishing text, because it shows us the completeness of the conquest that the Israelites had before, or had within the land of Canaan, as they are led by Joshua. There's a number of things that draw our minds backwards to different places that we've already been here within Scripture. But this really is Canaan's last stand. It is the last stand that King Jabina of Hazor has against the people he's thinking, and it seems to indicate to us later on that he was the ringleader of all this. He was the leader of all these cities. He says, listen, the only way we're going to be able to survive this is if we all gather together and go up against Israel. Alan, what did the Lord have to say in response to this last-ditch effort by the king of Hazor and all the other kings in the northern cities to try to stand against Israel and halt their conquest?
If you notice, there's a lot of similarities between this chapter and the previous one. The previous one, you have the same opening when such and such king heard about what had happened before. Right. And then he gathers 5 kings again. He seems so you have this big coalition. This time it's kind of more northern cities, whereas the previous one was central southern cities. So just a repeat of what happened before. Although this time the big difference with the northern cities compared to the southern cities is this is a much bigger threat. The southern cities are in kind of the Judean hill country and wilderness, much more rugged area where eventually Judah would be, the southern part of the land of Canaan, a much more rugged area. So you don't have the big population centers. You don't have specifically the chariots that we're going to see here. Well, up
as kind of West north, Tennessee, maybe compared to Middle Tennessee. West Tennessee being a little more wide open, not as populous, but then you got Middle Tennessee, which right now, especially, just booming.
Yeah.
Might be a little bit of comparison there.
There's a population difference. There's a terrain difference. Conquering the South is, I don't want to say a piece of cake, but it's much easier than it would be going up north, where there's flatlands. It's a little bit better land in terms of crops and yield that way. And of course, since it's flatter, you can have these bigger populations, and you also have the horses and chariots, which would have been the tanks of that day and age, basically. So imagine going up against, you've got your gun, but you're going up against a tank. Well, that's the same kind of thing. The guys with spears and swords going up against, the big chariots. So that would have been a big, that would have been a big threat to them. And it even talks about verse 4, a multitude as numerous as the sand of the seashore. Well,
we've heard that before.
The same language that Israel is described as. So this is a major threat, and of course Joshua, or the Lord comes to Joshua, do not be afraid of them. I will cause all of them to be killed before Israel. And he gives the command to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots. Now, this is kind of interesting. Normally, you would think, we'll just, if we destroy them, we capture them. Well, let's use their horses and chariots, and continue the conquest that way. But if you remember, one of the stipulations for the kings, the future kings of Israel, were to not accumulate horses and chariots. And of course, we know eventually Solomon will do that specifically. So all that checklist of things that the kings were supposed to not do, Solomon ends up doing. Well, this is one of them. And I think the reason why is obvious. If they were to amass this huge, powerful force full of chariots and horses, then, they begin to think that their victories come from their own might and not by the might of God. So he would rather they just destroy all of that stuff as well. So yeah, there's some similarities with the previous chapter, and then there's definitely some differences as well. And of course, the result is just as the Lord predicted. Joshua, the Lord handed them over in verse 8. He struck them down, pursuing them. And Joshua treated them as the Lord had told him. Verse 9, he hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots. So, and then he captures Hazor, which was the biggest city of them all. And you might wonder, we've seen Jericho's been burned with fire. I believe Ai has now. And now we see Hazor. Well, why didn't they do that with all the other cities? Well, they're going to occupy these cities. The Lord is giving this land to the people of Israel, and they're going to need a place to live. And, why would they burn all this down and then rebuild on the same spot? Why don't they just, kill everybody and then take their homes like that? So it was pretty rare for a city to be burned like that. But I think the reasons are typically more spiritual or more, as set an example, these were the centers, the most wicked cities, or the centers of the opposition. So kind of making a statement there when they did burn these with fire. And of course, Jericho had that curse upon it if anyone rebuilt it, that they would sacrifice their two sons. So Hazor didn't have that same thing, but we do see, and I think I was reading somewhere that there's evidence of Hazor being burned about the 1300s BC, right about this time. So there's some archaeological evidence to back up all of these accounts here. So I found that very interesting. But again, the Lord's with them. He gives them victory over this great, even greater force than they saw before in chapter 10.
And what you're referencing earlier, that the command to not accumulate for themselves horses and chariots comes from Deuteronomy 17 and verse 16 in this portion of the text, where he's speaking at the time whenever you're going to appoint a king, which could be connected with 1 Samuel chapter 8. He says, however, he must not acquire, speaking of the king, he must not acquire many horses for himself or send the people back to Egypt to acquire many horses, for the Lord has told you, you are never to go back that way again. And then it goes on to speak of the wives as well, the gold, all these things, which would lead to pride, lead to arrogance, lead to thinking that we are able to accomplish what we're able to accomplish because of the strength that we have, the strength that these other nations have in order to accomplish what they do in their conquest, greater armies. And then all of which is found within this text, a huge army, strength and power in horses and chariots. That's how they conquered. But here with God and his nation and his people, you don't conquer in that way. No, you conquer by my strength, by what I'm going to give you. That way people will know that you're different than them. You don't conquer just by sheer force and by number, overwhelming people, but you conquer by the strength that I am going to provide. And when we see that here within the text, something that also stands out to me, Alan, is the continual emphasis that's given in bringing Moses back up. That Moses, really showing Moses and Aaron as being really complementary figures here within the conquest. That everything that had been told to Moses then told Joshua, and Joshua carried out within the conquest, showing the continuity between these people, that they weren't to be seen as leaders who were at odds with one another. Oh, look at Moses. Moses wasn't able to succeed in getting them into the land. He fell short. Now look how much greater Joshua is. No, that's not the point at all. The point is they're working together. They're both on the same team. They're both working for the same goals. And Joshua is able to be where he is because of what Moses provided, which of course was mentorship and teaching, setting a good example of what a leader of God's people is supposed to do. You had a map up there, Alan. Was there something you wanted to show from there?
Just highlighting. Let's see. Let me find it here. This is kind of the campaign we just read. Just to give an idea. Of course, it mentions Chinnereth, which is another name we see later on for the Sea of Galilee. And then we know where Hazor is. Some of these names where you can see the question mark next to. We're unsure of. I know Mount Hermon is kind of the northern part up into what's that, the Goshen Heights is what they're referred to as nowadays towards Syria. There's a large mountain up there, Hermon, so kind of the northern end of the nation of Israel, and then Hazor would have been right in the air. But if you know anything about this area, this is very rich, very fertile area, not as wildernessy as the southern part of Israel. So kind of a different area than the south, but the result is still the same. God's with them, and they're able to. This is, we can see if all these areas are correctly placed, and we see how wide of an area this campaign was. If it was, again, we don't know if this was just one battle we're talking about, or kind of a summation of the entire campaign over several days and weeks, but it definitely was a successful and widespread campaign in the northern area.
Right, and that's probably a good point that you bring up, and what you have here on the screen, that where that Chinnereth is probably, for where we're familiar with, around the area of Gennesaret or Capernaum from the New Testament, around the area, really important place because the resource of the Sea of Galilee is. But what you said is important to notice, that all this didn't just happen overnight. This was truly a conquest that took time, and we understand that when we read what we read in verse 18, that Joshua waged war with all these kings for a long time. It took time to go throughout this land and to conquer these cities and to establish themselves as an own people. You mentioned too, and I thought it was a really good point you bring up, why Hazor was the only city that was burned. Well, one reason given is because it was the leader. It was the one that really stood up in rebellion against Israel. But they don't want to burn everything, because then there goes all the resources. And remember, one of the things that Moses warned them about as they prepare to enter into the land was, as you enter into this land, and as you're able to go into these cities that you did not build, and to take fruit off the vine that you did not plant, and to be able to enjoy all these resources, remember that you did not do this for yourself. but that the Lord your God was the one who delivered these things into your hand. So as they're going throughout this conquest and as they're taking down these peoples, it was really important for them to remember those words of Moses and to not become prideful and arrogant and think that they were the ones that were providing all these things for themselves. That wasn't true at all. In fact, if we think about where Israel themselves would have been, Alan, if it was just them doing their thing, well, they would never have gotten into the land to begin with. Why? Well, because, and this what brings this to my mind is what is said in verse 21. Whenever they originally entered or walked up to the doorstep of Canaan, and they went to spy out the land, what did they see? Well, they saw giant people. The Anakim are the ones they're probably referring to. They were terrified of them. They didn't want to fight up against them. And yet, what do we have here? We have a complete reversal of that from where they were so terrified of them back in Exodus and Deuteronomy and Numbers as they're making their way in. Well, now we see here Joshua taking these people down and nearly exterminating them to extinction. There's instead to be just a few remaining in Gaza and Gath and Ashdod, which of course would be probably the people from whom the Philistines and Goliath specifically descended. But I think this is a big statement here, Alan, that it says specifically that Joshua took down these people who had previously terrified Israel so much that they did not trust God that he could deliver them. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely, there's the reason all these are mentioned is because they're mentioned before, and this is supposed to remind us that these are the ones they were scared of. These are the ones that you were unwilling to attack. And look here, Joshua is able to exterminate them, to defeat them, and without any by faith. So if you'd have just had that faith back then you could have been the generation that did that. So yeah, this is definitely a callback to those earlier times and of lack of faith by the generations prior. I wanted to highlight, you mentioned just the time frame. Verse 18 kind of gives you a little bit of information about that. It just says Joshua waged war with all these kings for a long time. So this is not just a couple weeks or months or something. This is, I would assume, many years of conquering this land, and even we'll see that even though like Hazor is conquered, well, later on in the book of Judges we see that name pop up again, and even the same name of the king. I think it's it's like a king name like Pharaoh, but Jabin of Hazor is mentioned again in the story of Deborah. He's the antagonist there that is defeated by Deborah and Barak. So at some point in that period, that the city got rebuilt and the people were not completely conquered and were able to grow strong again. But verse 19 and 20, I think, are key. No city made peace with Israelites except the Hivites who inhabited Gibeon. So all of these cities, except for Gibeon, was the lone holdout that actually made peace with Israel. And the reason for that is it was the Lord's intention to defeat them. So this is the same language that is used against Pharaoh. Pharaoh, it doesn't mean that the Lord forced him to go against Israel and say no. And Pharaoh really wanted to say yes, but he couldn't because the Lord wouldn't make him. No, he knew Pharaoh's heart and he hardened it. So the way I see it is, they fought against Israel, and maybe at some point when the chips were down and they knew that they were defeated, maybe then they'd try to make peace at the very end after fighting them for years and years. But the Lord is preventing that. He wants them to be annihilated and destroyed without mercy because of their sins and their wickedness. He doesn't want them to to fight and then still live, basically. So just as the Lord commanded, he's destroying them without mercy, annihilating them, and for good reason, because we'll see in Joshua that these areas and cities and peoples that were not destroyed were a thorn in the side of Israel for years.
Yeah, all the Lord is doing there, I think you said it well, is just highlighting who they already are, which is demonstrated that this is who they are, and it shows that that's not how all the people were. In the fact that the Gibeonites were willing to come and to throw themselves at the mercy of Israel, the fact that Rahab and her family were willing to throw themselves in the mercy of Israel, there were people who were fearful of Israel and responded in wanting to receive mercy, and then that is contrasted with the vast majority of the peoples who might have been fearful of Israel, but instead of trying to find mercy and find peace with them, they just wanted to fight and rebel and believed in their gods having greater strength and power than the God of Israel. And every time they did that, well, they were shown to be wrong, which is why they were annihilated. And again, as well, this is important to see and recognizing that it fulfills what was said back in Deuteronomy again. Speaking about these people, one of the reasons why they were killed is they were being brought under judgment for the sins and the rebellion they had against God previously, because all the world is God's people, and they all are expected to be faithful to Him. And because they weren't, here they are brought under judgment. After all this takes place, Alan, Joshua took the entire land, and again, in keeping with what the Lord had told Moses and Joshua, this interaction between them. And Joshua then gave it as inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotments. And after this, the land had rest from war. And what we see following this text, Alan, of Joshua 11 is Joshua 12 through 22, I believe it. 21. 12 through 21 speaks of the territories, the breaking down of the territories, breaking down who has been defeated, the kings of these lands. And it also speaks of some of the unconquered lands, and then it goes through and talks about the inheritance that is given to each and every one of the tribes, the 12 tribes of the sons of Jacob. We're not going to read those in our study, just because it's not really much of a narrative here for us to discuss. So in lieu of reading these chapters, we'll just give you a little brief visual summation of what has taken place here, just showing where these lands were. Simeon and Judah there being in the south, Dan, Ephraim, Benjamin, West Manasseh kind of being on that western central location, Asher, Zebulun, Issachar, Naphtali, northwestern, and then what is going to come into play in our next study on Friday is those tribes that are east of the Jordan River, East Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben. This is just a visualization of what they're going to inherit and what is described in Joshua. Let's see, I believe it starts in chapter 13 and goes all the way through chapter 21 is the description of the inheritances that is given to the tribes of Israel. And another one described as the Levites, since they did not have their own specific land. They were scattered throughout as the priesthood. That's described in that text as well. Alan, what do you have you want to share with us to conclude this chapter? Maybe give a little insight you have briefly on these chapters we're not going to take time to read.
Well, just looking at this map here, you can obviously you see the sizes of the territories are vastly different, and obviously that makes sense. Not every tribe is the same size, so it doesn't require the same territory. But you have Judah obviously being one of the largest, and then of course Manasseh and Ephraim would have been the tribe of Joseph if you combine them together, and clearly Manasseh and Ephraim are the other larger tribes. So you have these two, and that makes sense. So those are the two leading tribes. Judah, obviously, kind of receiving that firstborn blessing from Jacob, and obviously we know what will happen and what will come through Judah. And then, of course, the tribe of Joseph being blessed as well. And we've seen that Joshua was an Ephraimite, so. He was kind of a leader from the tribe of Joseph, and we'll see Caleb is from the tribe of Judah. So both of those two major leaders at this time were from these two leading large tribes. So just interesting to see their land allotment compared to some of these other ones like a Benjamin or a Dan or something. And Dan's an interesting one. They're supposed to receive this land just kind of south on the coast there where Joppa and close to Judah, and they end up way up north. If you see there's Dan the city up there, well, that's because they get kind of pushed out. They don't actually end up taking that land and conquering it. They get pushed out away. So this is I think this is the ideal where they're supposed to end up, and but obviously things happen and they lose territory. Even the tribe of Judah, isn't able to conquer the coastlands. The Philistines would be a thorn in their side for years. So, but yeah, we'll see. The main issue in chapter 22, when we meet again and talk about it, will be the eastern tribes, Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben, and that issue of the dividing line between them. So we'll catch up on them. We'll catch up to them in chapter 22.
Right, we will do that. That's our plan for our next study on Friday. Hope that you can join us for that. If you have any questions about what we talked about today, please feel free to send us a message, or if you haven't left a comment, you can send us a message on that through the Facebook page, or you can go to our website and send us a message through that. Just Google Pleasant Plains Church of Christ, Jackson, Tennessee, and that should pop up, armorofgodonline.com. Even questions outside of our study, maybe you have some spiritual questions that you're seeking guidance in. If there's some way that we can assist you in that, or if there's some way we can serve you, please reach out. We'd love to try to do the best we can in that. If you're looking for a church to study with tomorrow night, whether in person or online, you can join us at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time as we continue our studies in the Minor Prophets. Chris Spence will be leading a study in Nahum, I believe it is. I'm excited to get into that with him. It's been a great series of studies in the Minor Prophets. Learned a lot and really appreciate the work that Chris has done and others in the class who participated in and offered up great comments. Hope you can join us for that if that is something that can benefit you or you'd be interested in. Thank you, though, again for being with us today. May God bless you in all that you do as you continue to serve him throughout this week. I hope you'll join us again on Friday as we continue to walk through history, skipping ahead to Joshua 24 as the eastern tribes return home. They make that pilgrimage eastward across the Jordan, and we're going to see a slight issue that comes up that we will investigate a little further then. Again, may God bless you. Have a great rest of your day, and hope you'll join us next time as we continue our walk through history. God bless you and be with you all.